One truck, one driver, $30,000 a month in freight revenue, and the man behind the wheel takes home $5,620. That number isn't a typo, and it isn't a bad month. It is, by the industry's own accounting, a completely normal outcome for an owner-operator running a single rig in the United States in 2024. The truck grosses more in a month than most American households earn in 5. The man driving it earns less than a mid-level manager at a regional insurance firm. His name is Marcus. He's 54 years old. He operates out of Bakersfield, California. He owns his truck outright. He has 22 years behind the wheel, and he is not, by any measure, doing something wrong. We'll come back to what actually happens to that $30,000 before Marcus sees a dollar of it. By the time this video ends, you will understand exactly where that money goes, and why the system that moves it was designed to work precisely this way. There are 350,000 owner-operators running single truck operations across the United States right now. They move 68% of all domestic freight by volume. They are, by every functional definition, the backbone of American commerce. Collectively, those 350,000 operators are leaving an estimated $12 billion per year on the table. Not through bad business decisions, not through poor route planning, through a contractual structure that was built, refined, and legally protected over 4 decades, and that most of them didn't fully understand when they signed into it. Marcus understood it better than most. In 2019, he left a fleet job at a regional carrier to go independent. He had $187,000 saved. He bought a 2018 Kenworth T680 outright. No lease, no debt. He calculated his operating costs down to the 10th of a cent per mile. He thought he had built a clean business. What he hadn't fully calculated was the layer of the supply chain he never directly touches. The layer that sits between him and the shipper. The layer that sets the price, controls the information, and takes its cut before Marcus ever sees a load confirmation. That layer is the freight broker. And understanding how it operates, not its bad actors, but its normal, legal, everyday function, is the second number we'll come back to before this video ends. The broker doesn't drive. The broker doesn't fuel. The broker doesn't sit in a cab at 2 a.m. outside Flagstaff waiting for a dock to open. But the broker gets paid first, every time. This is only the surface layer. To understand how we got here, you have to go back to 1980. The Motor Carrier Act deregulated the American trucking industry. Rates that had been set by government tariff boards were suddenly open to the market. Carriers could compete, shippers could negotiate, and a new class of middleman, the freight broker, emerged to connect the two. For the first decade, brokers were a convenience. They matched loads. They took a modest margin, typically 8 to 12% of the shipper's payment. The carrier knew the rate. The shipper knew the rate. The margin was disclosed. Then came the load boards, digital freight platforms, first DAT, then truckstop.com, then a dozen more, centralized load matching, and in doing so, centralized information. The broker now sat between two parties who could not easily see each other's numbers, and the margin began to grow. By 2010, average broker margins had reached 17 to 22%. By 2020, on spot market loads, the loads that owner-operators like Marcus depend on most, broker margins averaged 28%. On high-demand lanes, those margins crossed 40%. 40%. Gone. Before the engine starts. Here's what most people get wrong. They assume the broker is extracting an illegal margin. They are not. Federal law requires brokers to disclose their margin, but only if the carrier specifically requests it in writing within a narrow window after the load is delivered. Most carriers never ask. Most brokers never volunteer it. Marcus asked once, in 2021, on a load from Bakersfield to Phoenix. The broker had told him the rate was $2.10 per mile. Marcus requested the transaction record after delivery. The shipper had paid $3.47 per mile. The broker captured $1.37 per mile on a 612-mile load, $3.7 per mile on a 612-mile load. That is $838 on a single run, for sending an email and making 2 phone calls. Marcus did the math. Then he did it again. But here's what most people get wrong about what comes next. Marcus grosses $31,400 per month. That is a real number from his 2023 operating summary. It represents roughly 16,200 miles driven across 22 to 24 loads on lanes averaging $1.94 per loaded mile. Now let's follow that $31,400. His operating costs run $0.71 per mile. Fuel accounts for $0.38 of that. Insurance, a commercial policy for a single owner operator, runs $1,140 per month. Truck maintenance and tires average $880 per month on a rig his age and mileage. That's $11,502 in hard operating costs before he pays himself. That leaves $19,898 in apparent margin. That is more than most Americans earn in a year. That should be a good business. But here is the number buried in the broker contract. On those 22 to 24 loads per month, Marcus is operating primarily on the spot market, the open load board, no direct shipper contracts. His average broker margin, based on the transaction records he began systematically requesting after that Phoenix load, is 26.1% of the shipper's actual payment. That means for every dollar the shipper pays, Marcus receives $0.739 applied to his gross. The shippers in Marcus's lanes are paying approximately $42,500 per month for his freight capacity. Marcus sees $31,400 of it. The difference, $8,200 per month, $98,400 per year, flows to brokers, men and women who never left an office, who never touched a pallet, who were home for dinner every night while Marcus was running a night lane through the Nevada desert. $98,400 per year. That is more than the median household income in the United States, extracted from one truck, by one broker network, legally. Here is the counterintuitive turn, the thing that reframes everything. Marcus is not a victim of fraud. He is a participant in a functioning, legal, efficient market. The broker's margin exists because the broker provides real value, load matching, credit risk management, shipper relationships that took years to build. The system works, it just doesn't work equally. What changed in 2020 was volume. Pandemic freight demand sent spot rates to historic highs. Broker margins didn't compress with the volume, they expanded. The structural advantage the broker held in information asymmetry became a windfall, and that windfall reshaped what owner-operators now believe is possible, which is the third thing we said we'd come back to. Marcus's net, after operating costs and broker extraction, $5,620 per month, $67,440 per year. For a man running a $100,000 asset, working 70-hour weeks, carrying full liability for the cargo, the fuel, the road, and the schedule. If you've worked in a trade, if you've ever been the person doing the physical thing while someone else managed the transaction, you already know what Marcus knows. You've always understood that the hardest working man in the supply chain is never the one who gets paid like it. That's not cynicism. That's an accurate description of how intermediary markets have functioned for a century. The person with information controls the margin. The person doing the work controls the cost. Those two things are not the same leverage. What most people don't realize is that this is beginning to change. The FMCSA, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, finalized a rule in 2023 requiring brokers to make transaction records available electronically within 48 hours without requiring a written carrier request. That rule is being contested in federal court by broker industry groups. The outcome will determine whether 350,000 owner-operators gain the one thing they've never had in this market: price transparency. Marcus knows about the rule. He watches it the way a man watches a weather forecast when his livelihood depends on the harvest. That is the number we said we'd come back to, the transparency rule that could restructure how broker margins are set across the entire spot market. What happens if carriers can see the shipper rate in real time? What happens to a 26% margin when both parties can see it simultaneously? The broker industry knows the answer. That is why they are spending millions in legal fees to stop a rule that costs them nothing to comply with, except the margin. Which brings us to what happens next. Marcus is still running. Same truck, same lanes, same 70-hour weeks out of Bakersfield. He requested broker transaction records on every load in 2024, all 24 loads in January, all 23 in February. He is building a data set. He doesn't know exactly what he'll do with it yet, but he is done operating blind. Across the country, 350,000 men like him are making the same quiet calculation. The freight still moves, the loads still pay, the broker still sits between the shipper and the carrier, capturing a margin that the law currently allows and the market currently tolerates. The question isn't whether that margin is fair. The question is whether it survives the moment the carrier can finally see the number. The truck keeps rolling. But who actually owns the economics of that road? That answer is being rewritten right now, one transparency law at a time.